So welcome everyone to Grand Rounds. I think the timing of this Grand Rounds is very significant, considering what's happening in the United States and the election. And I know I've had patients come in this week and all they can talk about is their psychosis and how sick they're going to be and how they're never going to get over it. And of course, today's Grand Round focuses on wellness. So, and wellness in terms of what are the keys to mental health wellness, but also how we can take care of ourselves and how we can take care of each other. So I think the timing is perfect in terms of when you're coming. Dr. Lloyd Sederer is Chief Medical Officer of the New York State Office of Mental Health, and that's the largest state mental health system. He's also an adjunct professor of epidemiology at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia, and previously he served as the Executive Deputy Commissioner for Mental Hygiene Services in New York. He also has a background in inpatient. I never knew that, Lloyd. I was director of the inpatient unit here for years, and I know sometimes we think alike. In the recovery group, right, for inpatient services. He was medical director and the executive vice president of McLean Hospital, which I think, as most people know, is one of the Harvard teaching hospitals, and then worked at the American Psychiatric Association as director of the Division of Clinical Services. He's an outstanding teacher. He's received awards, the Irma Bland Award for Excellence in Teaching Residents. He's also received an award as the Psychiatric Administrator of the Year. He's been awarded a Scholar in Residence grant by the Rockefeller Foundation and an Exemplary Psychiatrist Award from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And you'll see where that came from when I talk about some of his publications. He's published 7 books for professionals and now 3 books for lay audiences, as well as over 5,000. That's a typo? I was wondering about that. I thought, wow, okay, 500 articles in both medical journals and non-medical publications. He's medical editor for mental health for the Huffington Post, where more than 250 of his posts and videos have appeared. He writes a regular column on mental health for U.S. News and World Report. He's a regular on Tell Me Everything, which is a Sirius XM radio show. I wanted to mention that today at 11 a.m. in the Langley Porter Auditorium, Dr. Sederer is going to be talking about how to write for the public, for lay audiences. He obviously has tons of experiences for that. All the PGY 3s and 4s are already scheduled to come to that, as well as the APC faculty, because it's at the time of a regular conference. But the room is large enough if other people want to come. It should be a terrific conference. So just some of the books that Dr. Sederer has written: The Family Guide to Mental Health Care in 2013, and there are a lot of guides for consumers, including the APA Consumer Guide for the DSM. But this book focuses on a couple of things which are often the biggest struggles that family members have: how to navigate the mental health system and how to help family members get care when they don't want care. He also wrote the Diagnostic Manual of Mishigas. And for those of you who don't know what Mishigas means, it's a Yiddish word for craziness. And he divides all of DSM diagnoses into Mishigas Major and Mishigas Minor, which says it all. His book, 4 Secrets of Mental Health, which you'll hear more about, is coming out in December of... It's out. I thought it was going to come out in December. That's great. Wonderful. And just a little story about Dr. Sederer, which Christina Mangorian said that I could share because I think it talks about him as a mentor. So Dr. Mangorian, most people know, came here from Columbia University, and she said that she had been decided to come to UCSF. She had a month, she had a baby, she had to pack up everything, she had to make all the arrangements, her husband, you know, moving cross country, buying property here, tons of stuff to do with 1 month to go. And Dr. Sederer says to her, "You've got to write up what we did in New York." And she says, "I can't write it up. I mean, I have so, you know, it's a nice idea, but I have so many things to do, I can't possibly do it right now." And he says, "You've got to do it. It's really important stuff." So, of course, knowing those of us who know Christina, you know, of course she did it. And it was a great article and just a great production. And she says, "I never would have done it without Dr. Sederer." And we're going to have a discussant this morning who's Dr. Victoria Sweet. And she's been told to comment on what Dr. Sederer says, to critique it, to be as challenging as she possibly can, which we'll see, and then we'll have questions and answers. Dr. Sweet is an associate clinical professor of medicine at UCSF. She's a prize-winning historian with a PhD in history. She practiced medicine for 20 years at Laguna Honda Hospital, and she wrote a book, God's Hotel, A Doctor, a Hospital, and a Pilgrimage to the Heart of Medicine. And her perspective is that we're trying to get control of healthcare costs by use of efficiency, of course in 2015-16, the use of lean, and that we've been headed down the wrong path. That medicine works best, we arrive at the right diagnosis and the right treatment for the least amount of money when it's personal and face-to-face, when the doctor has enough time to do a good job. Pay attention not only to the patient, but what's around the patient. She calls this approach slow medicine, and she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship to write her next book, which is entitled Slow Medicine, Fast Medicine, Healing in an Age of Technology. And she's also part of a working group for slow medicine at UCSF. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sederer.
Thank you so much, Renee. I am here thanks to Renee's generosity and making this happen. So thank you. And I want, of course, want to recognize the chair because most of us learn that you may have some good ideas, but unless you can persuade your chair, they're not good ideas whatsoever. So thank you, and a number of other old friends from Boston and from New York, so it's really great to be here. So I've been advised with this talk to just take a quick moment about what Renee had described, and that is that I have a second life, not a secret life, but a second life that goes back now about 8 years when I started writing for the general public. And once I started, I just couldn't stop. It was, though I continued to publish professionally, I try to dodge it as much as possible so I can spend my time writing for the general public. And I write principally because I see the work that I do as a type of advocacy for people who are ill, who want to get care, and their families, and to give them the kind of information that makes them an informed and confident consumer of services. And I think that in the end, and when I work in the public sector, patients who are much more informed, much more confident about what they need, and much more critical about the care that they get, results in better outcomes, that we do better when the patients are better prepared. One last comment. This is the black box warning. So if some of you are writing for the general public or some of you have ambitions to do so, I think this is wonderful. But you have to know you cannot make any money doing this. You cannot. I don't get paid to be an editor at the Huffington Post. I've gotten not a nickel from them for now maybe 300 articles that I've contributed. I don't get paid from U.S. News. And some years ago, I was writing regularly, frequently for Psychology Today, and I stopped, but I started again. But at that time, at the end of the year, I got a check for $100. So be warned. Oh, and then, so I'm going to talk from the ideas that I put together in this book. And as you'll see, it's mercifully short. It's 109 pages, it has pictures, it has stories, and I was determined to do that because I wanted to provide people with a book that they could finish. And so many people say, you know, I bought this book and that book, and I got through the first few chapters, 100 pages, and it's on my nightstand. So this is a finishable book. And then at the handouts, there was this piece of paper. So it's, of course, a shameless way of telling you how to purchase the book, but it's also a cheat sheet. So if you don't want to take notes or you want to remember what the 4 secrets are, they are on the front here, and they're defined. Okay. And I'm delighted. Actually, the black box warning doesn't apply to people like Victoria Sweet, because if you write a book like God's Hotel, you'll actually make some money from it. So she's my idol here. One of these days, I may. So many of us know that cancer has been called the emperor of all maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee, who's an oncologist at Columbia, friend, amazing man. But if cancer is the emperor of all maladies, then mental illnesses and addictions, I argue, are their Zeus. These are unbelievably ubiquitous. Their consequences are devastating. They're responsible for vast family and social burden, economic costs. And too often, as we see in our clinical practice, they defy cure. We're much better now than we were before, but we've not made the kind of advances that we need to make. Mental and addictive disorders are the Zeus of that which darkens the medical landscape. And so this is not just a matter of pride of place that, you know, like we have the most ill patients. It's a call, maybe like in the wake of the election this week, a call to say, given this situation, what are we going to do? What can we do now that makes a difference? Not wait 4 years, but now. And that's what I mean to do in this book. And all of these 4 secrets, if you will, which I believe are should be completely familiar to you, hiding in full sight, plain sight, are ones that pertain to our patients, to their families, to ourselves, and they're ones that can be used, I believe, by people who are ill and in recovery. The first secret, and some of the gray hairs in the audience will be familiar with this. This is a quote from a 1978 paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. Admitted or not, the fact remains that a few patients kindle aversion, fear, or even outright malice in their doctors. And this was written by a colleague of mine, Dr. Jim Groves. I was working at Mass General at that point, running the inpatient unit, and Jim was a CL doctor on the medical surgical wards of the infamous Massachusetts General Hospital. And he published this paper, which was a sensation at the time. And I think once in a while gets exhumed, but I exhumed it for this purpose. And it was a sensation because of how remarkably candid he was in terms of describing the feelings that doctors, but not just nurses, clinicians, have in caring for certain patients who seem to want to do anything they can to defy getting better. And what the paper was not just honest, but it was also very helpful. And this is the first secret, that behavior serves a purpose. And he described 4 types of the kind of patients that make us meshuggah, make us crazy, make us feel hatred and aversion towards them. They were the dependent clinger, the entitled demanders, the manipulative help rejectors, and the self-destructive deniers. And again, his aim here was not to be disparaging of these patients, whatever category they may have fallen into, but it was because he observed that his colleagues were so helpless and so handcuffed in their capacity to care for these patients that he wanted to give them away. He described the dependent clingers as inescapable. They're there hovering in the waiting room, in the hall. They're there again and again, and you can't just escape them, though you do after a while your damnness to accomplish that, because they do feel like they're going to bleed you and to drain you. And he said that these were people who were more interested in the relationship, in the experience of being with the doctor than getting better. They were dependent clingers, that actually getting better represented a risk to their being able to come back to the doctor. Dependent clingers. Then there were the entitled demanders. These can be even more challenging because they're hostile and they devalue us, and they're at the end of the interaction we think, who the hell do you think you are? I'm trying to help you, and you're giving me all this crap, and you're insulting me. And of course, then we pull away. And he went on to describe that they had a terror of abandonment, a sort of a variation on the first, the dependent clingers, that was buried beneath their offensive superiority. Then there was a term which I actually don't see very much anymore. Do you guys still use the term called crocs? No. That was very popular back then. The croc is the help rejector. And this patient has always been the biggest challenge in primary care because they come and they say they come back and they come back and they don't get better, and you order more tests, you give them this and that, and nothing works. And there's a Yiddish expression for this, which I think is probably a better diagnostic term. It's called Gornish helfen. So probably very, very few people know what that means. But Gornish helfen means nothing can help. Nothing can help. Doctor, nothing can help. That's their song. Nothing can help. And they too are there not to get better. They too are there for a variety of primary and secondary gain purposes that he described. In fact, it was even, I think, a product of this work that changed some of the way primary care doctors, at least the ones that were exposed in Boston at that time, handled Crocs, and which was to, instead of trying to say, look, I don't need to see you anymore. You know, either you do this or you do that. That the strategy became, I have to see you in 6 weeks. I want you to make an appointment. I want you to be at the appointment in 6 weeks. So you immediately answer to the fear of the dependent needs, and then you're not expecting much from that, but you're managing the patient's psychology. Finally, he described the self-destructive deniers. And he described a patient who had esophageal varices, was alcoholic, cirrhosis, continued to drink heavily, the kind of patient that you go in and you say, look, you know, you keep this up and I'll be at your wake in a week. And they don't do anything. And he began to describe these people as those who are more interested in dying than living. Life is not what their primary purpose is, that they're actually, their primary drive is to end their lives. So that's Groves, and when I read this paper in 1978, I thought it was fantastic, but when I reread it a few years ago, I thought, there it is. Behavior serves a purpose. And this is an example from our everyday clinical experience, and in the book I have a variety of other examples, and one that's there isn't just time to get to, but one that Renee knows very well about, because I talk about Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children, and the purpose her behavior served. So in concluding this first comments about this first secret, I want to emphasize that understanding the purpose served by a patient does not result in cure. That's an old Hollywood notion, that if we uncover, if we abreact, that somebody is going to be sort of reborn at the moment. That's a dated notion, it deserves to be dated. But I do believe that our approaching patients with the basic objective of understanding what they are doing, understanding the purpose that their symptoms serve them, is a fundamental shift, a necessary shift for us to be able to engage and ally with patients. It replaces darkness with light, madness with reason, blame with tolerance, dismissal with discussion, and powerlessness with problem solving. That's the first secret. Okay. So now the examples will become even more deviant. This one is probably the only one that's kind of close to home, but maybe not really. But the second one, so there's a French film that came out in 1970 called L'Enfant Sauvage, The Wild Child, by Francois Truffaut. Have any of you seen this film? Okay. It's a really quite extraordinary film. And the film opens with a frame, black and white frame, that just reads, "This story is authentic." It opens in 1798 in a French forest. And then the frame shifts to the moving picture, and we see a naked boy, prepubescent, running through a dense forest in a very rural part of France. And a woman harvesting mushrooms spots this boy. She gets scared. She goes and finds a couple men, and they get some dogs, and they hunt down the boy. And he's in a lair, and they smoke him out, and they try to capture him, and he's feral. He kicks, he bites, he resists. And when they leave him alone, put him in a cage, he rocks, like we see with autistic people. So they didn't know what to do with this kids. So they sent him to Paris. This is the story. And this is actually a true story, and there's a book, L'Enfant Sauvage. Sent him to Paris, where he was admitted to a school for the deaf and dumb. And he proved himself to be neither deaf nor dumb. He was unsocialized. He was a primitive, feral child who had no early attachment in his life, and the consequences were irreparable. And the story, in the story, a medical student named Victor, was prosperous, took the boy to live in his home to try to teach him with the help of a kindly housemaid. And they quieted him down, but he ran away. He was irreparably damaged. What does this have to do with anything, you may ask? So if you fast forward then to the last century was marked by some incredible psychological theoreticians and clinicians. After Freud, who was interested in sex and aggression, came a wave of other people: Melanie Klein, Anna Freud, John Bowlby, Renee Spitz, and in this country, well, in Britain also, John Bowlby and Harry Harlow, D.W. Winnicott, and they were all interested in attachment. Attachment as a primary need, as a primary drive for human beings. And I'm going to illustrate this first in monkeys and then in humans by using Harry Harlow's experiments, because most people can't escape reading about these because they're in every psychology 101 textbook. So if you remember, what Harlow did is he took these infant rhesus macaque monkeys and he separated them very early from their mothers, subjecting them to maternal deprivation. And he then put them into different groupings. And he created two types of surrogate mothers for these now deprived infant monkeys. The first was just made of wire and wood, and the second was that same wire and wood surrogate monkey covered with soft cloth. And he demonstrated that the monkeys who only had the wire and wood surrogates became highly fearful, huddling, sucked their thumbs. They really were unable to proceed with development. The monkeys who had the cloth mothers, on the other hand, they were able to explore, they were able to have some developed courage, they were able to socialize. When he gave the monkeys a choice between the wire monkey and the wire surrogate and the cloth surrogate, and he put food with the wire surrogate, the monkeys chose the cloth mother. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use this term, but it was an example of how the soft blankie, the attachment, trumped food. And he also demonstrated in other experiments that there was a crucial time that attachment is laid down in the psychology of infants, and we know this too from some of the other work, Renee Spitz and John Bowlby. And that it's early and that it forms a foundation. And without that foundation, what we see is what we saw in the monkeys and what is demonstrated beautifully in this French film. So another example now to humans. And so how many of you have heard of the Harvard study of adult development? Okay. So this is a study that began in 1938 at Harvard College, where the study enrolled 268 Harvard College sophomores. So these were obviously highly privileged and smart young men. And then a few years later, they enrolled about twice as many young men who were living in poor, underprivileged neighborhoods in Boston. And the purpose of the study maybe oversimplified, was to answer one question. What makes for a long and healthy life? What makes for a long and healthy life? And if your answer is fame and money, you're wrong. And they showed again and again that the principal element in a person's life that made for long and healthy life was a trustworthy attachment to somebody that they knew they could turn to when the going gets rough. And it wasn't that these were perfect unions, but they were free of conflict, but there was a deep abiding trust that this is somebody who's going to be there for me. And they even later then began to do cognitive studies. They added women, and they showed that it was not only a long life and a healthier life, free of many chronic diseases or with less disability from chronic diseases, but also better cognitive functioning as measured by memory tests. So this is the second secret, the power of attachment. That attachment is what we humans and monkeys and others need, and we need it early, and if we have it throughout our life, we're going to have a longer and healthier and smarter life. That's the second secret, hiding in plain sight. And when I say these secrets are actionable, these this one in particular, I think, is probably should be part of the mental status examination, or as basic as a blood pressure, which is to ask people, who do you have in your life? Who do you turn to? Whom can you trust? The third secret. Now, this is also a true story, and if you haven't heard this one, you're going to say, oh, he's making this up, but I'm not. So the care of wounds, particularly battle wounds, has been a subject of medical literature for a very long time. And the first mention is on Egyptian papyrus from 1700 BC, where a physician describes proper wound care. And the physician says that the proper care of a wound, probably obtained in any number of ways, from a club or a sword or whatever, the proper care is to wash the wound gently, clean the debris, and cover the wound to allow natural healing. And that practice of really careful, caring attention to wounds continued until about 900 or 1000 AD. And do you know what was invented by the Chinese in, I think, 950 AD? Gunpowder. And that then led to the creation of guns, and guns became the principal means by which men warred with one another and did damage to one another. And the standard of care, so if there was a textbook or a paper about how to care for gunshot wounds on the battlefield, the standard of care was to pour boiling oil into the wound. This was the standard of care in the 1400s throughout Europe. And this was obviously a barbaric practice. The consequences were disastrous. Did it stop? No. It continued for 200 years. And then some French surgeon on a battlefield ran out of oil. So without oil, he was forced to pour some water gently on the wound, remove the debris, and cover it for natural healing, and came and returned the practice of not pouring boiling oil. This is a true story. So it's also obviously a metaphor, and it's meant to be a metaphor for caring not just for war wounds, but for psychic wounds. In the 80s, I was practicing in Cambridge, and with a good close friend named Bob Drake, who's now at Dartmouth. And we were seeing what we thought to be the consequences of intensive psychotherapies, particularly when they were rendered for people who had very fragile egos, people with psychotic conditions, people highly vulnerable, people with traumatic conditions, and that they would be subjected, if you will, to being seen in psychotherapy every day. The psychotherapy would be exploratory. They would be put into groups that were confrontative. They were in family meetings where there was often a great deal of criticism about the family members. And in these two papers, we described what we held to be the adverse consequences of intensive treatments. Psychosocial treatments, psychological treatments of mental disorders, particularly psychotic disorders. And I think, we're not using that boiling oil anymore, but it took quite a while for us to get to much more questioning people about what is it that they want in their lives, enabling people to have much more attention paid to their cognitive skills, their social skills, family support. And the same also applies to medications. And I have 35,000 outpatients in the system that I'm CMO of, 3,700 inpatients. And I've worked for almost 10 years to try to have us be much more parsimonious. Number of medications, doses of medications, and so forth. The same applies. This is the third secret. As a rule, less is more. As a rule, less is more. And I just want to mention, this is not meant to be critical of the 14th century, 1400, the surgeons in the 14th century, or a long history of our using intensive treatments. The history and science of cancer, beautifully rendered by Mukherjee, demonstrates again and again where a little bit worked, doctors would then think, well, if a little bit worked, a lot more is going to work better. And we saw that in cancer chemotherapy, we saw that in radiation, we saw that in radical surgeries. As a rule, less is more. Fourth secret. So a few years ago, maybe 5, my employer, the state of New York, decided they figured out how they could buy health insurance cheaper. And so suddenly I got a letter saying I have to change my insurance is going to be changed, and I had to change my health plan. So I had to find a new primary care doctor. And I found one, took me a little while, and I found one very accomplished doctor, a Presbyterian. And I went to my first appointment. And she sat down with me and she said, "What are your goals for your health and your health care?" And I thought, geez, I am in the right place. Can you imagine a doctor starting out there? What are your goals? And I had actually thought about this, and I said to her, I have 2 goals. The first is I want to reduce the chronic inflammatory processes in my body. And the second is that I want to increase my immune competence. Those are my goals. This was the Associate Chief of Medicine, a Presbyterian, a rheumatologist. I mean, she knew what I was talking about, but she was bemused and thought, I don't know whether I'm going to continue with this guy, but let me hear him out. And I described that we know that the chronic inflammatory process, which is the inflammatory process that doesn't subside as it should normally, lays down this crappy lipid plaques in our cardiac vessels, in our brain vessels, and this is what increases our risk for heart attack, for stroke, dementia. And more we now have evidence that chronic inflammatory process is instrumental to the development or when worsening of conditions like depression, PTSD, even schizophrenia. So I wanted to calm down my chronic inflammatory process, and then I wanted to enhance my immune competence. Not just because I wanted to have fewer colds, right? Because you have good immune competence, you have fewer colds, but also it's our immune system that identifies aberrant cells from taking over and becoming cancer. So those were my two goals. So I knew from the Harvard study that if I have a good marriage and good relationships with my family, friends, I'm going to have a long and healthy life. But I could actually top it off, as our patients can and as our loved ones can, by doing this. So there was a study done at a neighboring, not so close neighboring medical center called Stanford, in conjunction with the University of Wisconsin, and I think University of California, but I'm not sure which branch. That came out about a year or so ago. And they took 97 young girls, ages 10 to 14. And the girls were divided into two groups. They were selected on the basis of two groups. Those girls who had mothers with a history of clinical depression, and those girls whose mothers did not have any history of clinical depression. And none of the girls had any history of depression. And they took DNA samples, they swabbed their mucosa, and they looked at the girls' telomeres. Do you know what telomeres are? So you should know about telomeres, because telomeres are the little caps on the ends of our DNA, and they're kind of like what hold it together. And the longer your telomeres are, the less likely you are in your lifetime to have heart disease, stroke, diabetes, dementia, osteoporosis. These are protective elements in our genome. And they looked at the length of the telomeres in these girls. And the girls who had, remember, none of these girls had depression. But the girls whose moms had depression had significantly shorter telomeres by the time they were young adolescents. So they were already at risk for a variety of conditions. Then they took the same two girls, and they, with their parents' permission, they stressed them. They gave them these impossible tests where you can't figure out an answer and someone's yelling at you, hurry up, hurry up. And they measured the cortisol of the girls before the test, during the test, and after the test. And all the girls had normal cortisol levels before the test. But the girls who had shorter telomeres, moms with depression, they had very high spikes of cortisol during the stress test, and it didn't subside easily. So they already had immune inflammatory hyperreactivity. And then finally, they followed these girls till they were 18, and 60% of the girls with the shorter telomeres and the cortisol reactivity had developed depression, and none of the girls in the other group had. Adverse childhood experiences, the early trauma, foster care, domestic violence. This is another example here where our bodies are changed, our stress reactivity is changed, and we're going to get sick as a result. That's the fourth secret. Chronic stress is the enemy. That's the fourth secret. And that's a secret as relevant to everybody, and one that I've worked on, and my primary care doctor has recognized that there may be something here. So I'm going to conclude then with a quote from a French philosopher. Because much of these, what I'm trying to describe here, is seen as types of habits that we develop. And this philosopher said, "For in truth, habit is a violent and treacherous schoolmistress. She establishes in us, little by little, stealthily, the foothold of her authority. But having by this mild and humble beginning settled and planted it with the help of time, she soon uncovers in us a furious and tyrannical face against which we can no longer have the liberty of even raising our eyes." So many things that start out as small and are adaptive, but over time become maladaptive, are what the habits that we have. So what I'm trying to say here this morning on the shoulders of Montaigne is that failing to try to understand that a behavior is serving a purpose seems a habit worth changing, since it has the power to distance us from those we serve and care about. Not appreciating a human touch, a connection made, an attachment fostered, the greatest anodynes against isolation and despair, seems a sad habit that deprives us all, caregivers and recipients alike. Doing more may seem a virtue, but not when its intentions are thwarted or it ushers in another layer of maladies. And finally, it seems a really bad set of habits that have outstripped our adaptive responses to predators and acute dangers and have now established in us chronic inflammatory processes and environments that produce these particularly traumatic environments. Those are the 4 secrets. I don't pretend that doing something about them is easy. It's hard, but so is living with a disease. And my aim here is that I hope these 4 secrets will be of use to you and those that you care for. Thank you very much.
Hard act to follow. That was a really great talk, Dr. Sederer. So, thank you very much for having me here. And I have to tell you that this is the second book of Dr. Sederer's I've read. I did read with a lot of enjoyment his Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mishugas. And I have to tell you, I enjoyed it tremendously, and I recommend it to everybody. He tells really the essence of psychiatry and what we've all been seeing over the years through old Jewish jokes. And what's striking about it is the amount of wisdom and kind of contained in, the distinction between neuroses and psychoses and situational disorders and personality disorders is these wonderful Yiddish phrases. So I can recommend that. And then this is the book he sent me to discuss, and I've never been a discussant before. So I asked Lloyd what I should do. He told me I should read the book, speak for 10 or 15 minutes, and give my thoughts on it, and more importantly, my ideas about, connected to my ideas about slow medicine, and any connections that might exist, he said, between what he'd written and my own thinking. He told me to challenge his ideas also, which I believe was a mistake, because I'm a very challenging person anyway, and I told him on the phone when we talked about this that he should have told me not to challenge him. And he did such a beautiful job just now of really giving you the essence of this book that he's made my task much easier. So one of the things that's striking about this book for me as a reader and a writer is how small it is. I mean, he begins by talking about that. And in fact, I read this about 5 days ago, and I read it once, and I remembered all those 4 secrets and how the book was constructed, and that's kind of amazing. It's interesting for those of you who think about writing. You know, this is a clever way to write a book. And I hope you do make money on it, Lloyd. So let me start by saying, telling you a little bit about myself. So you've heard that I'm an internist. I also have a PhD in medical history. And I did write this book several years ago about my experiences at Laguna Honda, weaving it in with history and politics. It's called God's Hotel. How many of you have been at Laguna Honda? How many have been at the old Laguna Honda? It's quite a few. So you know, actually, that even though I'm an internist, there's a lot of psychiatry over there. In fact, one day I sat down and went through, I'd saved all my index cards over the years, and I went through and I counted up how many patients I'd had and how many of them had psychiatric problems. It was about 40%. One of the things I realized at Laguna Honda was it happened is when Napa State closed and when all the mental institutions closed and all those patients got thrown out on the streets in the late 80s and 90s pretty much, eventually, of course, they wandered around and they got diabetes and they got wounds that wasn't treated and they got HIV and they didn't bother to treat it, and eventually they got so sick that there was no place else to send them but the old alms house, which was Laguna Honda. So I saw a lot of psychiatry there, and for any of you who haven't had a chance to rotate through there, it's quite remarkable. So I do have my own opinions about the 4 secrets that Dr. Sederer mentions. I think they're excellent. I'm just going to go through them one by one. His behavior serves a purpose. Now, what got me about that was, first of all, thinking about some of my patients. As soon as I thought about that, one of my patients in particular popped into my mind. I call her Rayleigh Showman. She was our ex-Berkeley student who in the 1960s jumped out of a building on LSD and rendered herself permanently paraplegic. And she was also, I'm going to use a hard term here, the craziest person I ever met. But she also saw things. She had visions. And her craziness allowed her, I realized as I got to know her more and more at Laguna Honda, immense freedom to express herself. She said it how she saw it. And she did see it, and she did say it, and her diagnosis or her behavior did serve a purpose. It gave her cover. It gave her freedom. But, and here is my critique. So I think it is useful to see that her behavior served a purpose, but my critique is, since Dr. Sederer said I could be challenging, is how does this insight that her behavior has a purpose, how does it really help me as her doctor? Does it help me? And as he deftly describes in the book and he's explained to you, her retreat allows her a retreat. She doesn't have to engage, work, or deal. How convenient for her. How inconvenient for me. I realized as I was reading this part that this first secret didn't make me any more compassionate towards my patients. But it did put me in touch with my own resentfulness of their behavior. Behavior serves a purpose. Exactly. The patient's purpose. To say what they want. To act the way they want. But what good does that do me? How does knowing that help me help them? Does it? Rayleigh doesn't care that her retreat into madness and self-involvement has a purpose. Or rather, I think she knows its purpose at some subliminal level quite well. So for the Q&A, I challenge Dr. Sederer to give us an example of how does our understanding of that first secret help us help patients, or even ourselves. Who anyway is right in all this? You know, being at Laguna Honda, I was there for about 20 years, and I got to really know a lot of these patients. And I don't know if any of you who know the place ever saw Harmony Park. It was a sort of amusing, ironic little bus stop that they'd set up when smoking became illegal in the hospital, so that patients could still smoke. And I used to see our patients in their wheelchairs and missing arms, sitting together there, smoking their cigarettes and talking, laughing, telling jokes, spreading gossip. And I would see them as I was running from one meeting to another, one patient to another, with chronic stress and acute stress, and periodically it would hit me, who's the smartest person here? Who's the happiest person? Who gets to decide on whose values? So the second secret, again, the power of attachment as a human need and drive, and he did just a beautiful job just now of really summarizing that whole chapter, so I don't have to do it. What struck me about that was he's talking, I think, about, he calls it the royal road to remedying human suffering, that power of attachment. But the thing is, it's gone out of psychiatry in the same way that, to the extent that medicine is about person to person and taking time with patients, psychiatry even more, at least the old psychiatry, which he also mentions, the couch, the daily meetings, was built upon that idea that you would transfer to your psychiatrist and be able to work through your neuroses with that. But of course, today, as everyone in this room knows, today we have pills and potions and electrons, and they work pretty darn well for many things. And I discovered this long ago, to my chagrin at first, and then to my relief, which is now why I address you not as a psychiatrist but as an internist, because I started out to be a psychiatrist. That's how I got to medical school. I'd read Jung's memoir, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, and I decided that that is what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be a Jungian analyst. So that's why I went to medical school. And then in medical school, I found I liked medicine quite a bit, but I still started in a psychiatric internship. I was pretty naive, and it was on the only locked ward in the county I was in. So, of course, I didn't have these well-paying, articulate, neurotic patients. I had acutely psychotic patients, and I quickly realized that they responded much better to the meds than they did to the daily psychotherapy or the groups. So that I left at that point and ended up becoming an internist, ended up getting to Laguna Honda, where, in fact, we still had time. And what I was struck by most at Laguna Honda was the time that attachment required. And then when I started having those years and years with patients, they did begin to change. Even more, I think, what I was struck by in that chapter on the power of attachment was that what Dr. Sederer talks a lot about is the power of not attaching. The example he gave of the young boy, it's what happens when there is no attachment. And he relates in the book, he relates his power of attachment to, or really lack of attachment, to addiction and violence. And he suggests that the transference, the therapeutic alliance, is what will allow us to help our patients. But again, I challenge that. Is it an opportunity for our patients, that one, at best, 1 hour a week that we might have with a patient? Can we really change what happened 20, 30, 40 years ago? And what I saw at Laguna Honda was that it took months and even years. And what I saw was that when I had the time, what really happened was that to the extent that my patient changed me, I could change my patient. To the extent that I was truly affected by my patient, we both began to change vis-a-vis one another. And so one of the issues, I think, is if that's what we're trying to do at any level, how do you, as psychiatrists, get that kind of time, that kind of venue back? And that's one of the things I'm dealing with in medicine, is how we can get time back with our patients. As one of the things in medicine, anyway, that I've discovered is that all this emphasis on efficiency is actually inefficient because it never gets to the root of the problem. So we end up spending more and more money, more and more lab tests, more and more x-rays with a medical patient. Now, at Laguna Honda, when I had the time to get to the bottom of things, even though it seemed expensive and inefficient, it was actually the most kind of efficient healthcare of all. So I think that's an outstanding question that I'd like to see you address. If you think it is important, then how would these some of them young students and interns and residents go about doing that? Is there some way? And then I'd like to sort of end by talking a little bit about, well, not end, actually, his third one about less is more as a rule. And I think it's clever that he put in the words as a rule, because, of course, a lot of times less is simply less, as we're likely to see going forward. But the less is more he's really talking about in that chapter, it seemed to me, was actually, he talked about this idea that we used to think that using tons of medication was the way to go, or that tons of therapy was the way to go, and that over the years he'd realized you don't need very much. You don't have to pour boiling oil on the wound, that sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit down with our patients, accept them as who they are, and then say, okay, you got these voices, but now how are you going to catch a bus, right? So the less is more idea there. But I think even more in that chapter, what I got out of that chapter is he's asking us to re-look at ideas that we grew up with, these fixed ideas that we have about how to take care of things. And the one that I was most struck by for myself is, he doesn't mention, but is Goffman's position on institutionalization. Do you all know that? Goffman, institutionalization? Yeah. And one of the things I noticed at Laguna Honda was probably the most powerful attachment, most powerful therapeutic force I had at Laguna Honda was not me, wasn't the doctors or even the nurses, it was the place itself, it was the institution. Those patients there that we all know have never had a place that was so structured, 3 meals a day at the same time, lights out at 10. You can smoke there, but you can't smoke here. And what I saw with so many patients is that was therapeutic. And I'd love to see us go back and re-look at, and this is starting to percolate, I believe, in psychiatry, at the benefits of institutionalization for some of these long-term patients. And last, I was sort of bemused myself by his last one about chronic stress as the enemy, because it made me think about a French proverb. We're both Francophiles. I have a partner who's from Switzerland, so we speak French sometimes together, and she tells me that there's a proverb in French. How many people know some French? I'll translate it, I promise, but just for fun, for the people who do know French. The proverb is, and it relates to Dr. Sederer's chronic stress, is the enemy, mieux vaut être riche et en bonne santé que pauvre et malade. It's better to be rich and healthy than poor and sick. Which gets back to Dr. Sederer's fourth secret about chronic stress. Well, yes, that's true. To be poor, to be from a divorced family, to live in the projects, to be surrounded by addiction, yes, it's not good for people. What do we do about that, though? I mean, this is serious, because at least patients at Laguna Honda, they were all that way. What do you do when you're face-to-face with that? So Dr. Sederer ends his book with two suggestions. One is to be political, is how I interpreted it, to try and put our energy into creating a world where that doesn't happen. And frankly, I found that very stressful. I have to say, Lloyd. Thinking that I have to change the world into doing everything else, including my laundry, and it's just like, okay, do laundry, come and do this discussion, change world, get my car repaired. It's just too much. So I'd like him to maybe talk a little bit about a practical way, especially given these times, because I do think this is the time for us to become political. And I never said that in my life. And he ends with his second way of talking to us about what we can do about chronic stress for ourselves in a very important way, telling us to take care of ourselves. And I think that is extremely important, because my own internal guide, I read this years ago before I went to medical school, and it's a phrase by Lao Tzu. He says, If a man have not order within him, he cannot spread order around him. And I think if we don't have peacefulness within us, we can't spread it around us. If we don't have joy and we don't have happiness inside us, we cannot give it to our patients. So that's actually what I found. The longer I was at Laguna Honda, the less and less and less I did. And my patients got better and better. And there was one day where I was sitting on a patient's bed, and we were just hanging out. I mean, I wasn't doing anything at all. Like nothing. But I could tell that there was something that had shifted, you know, just in that, where that patient had been when I first came up and sat down, and something had shifted in me. And I began to feel a bit like a quack because I stopped doing anything at all. Really. I mean, after I did the first initial bit, tried to figure out what was really wrong, did their exam, then I'm like, we're just hanging out together. You're being you with your craziness or your retreat or your paranoia or your chronic stress or whatever it is you're doing, and I'm being me, and now we're just hanging out together. So that's actually what I'd like to finish with right now and throw it open. I believe we're going to have Q&A and afterwards. So thank you very much.
So if people want to have questions for Dr. Sederer or Dr. Sweet, now is the time. Yes.
And this pertains, it's a great question, and pertains to what Victoria was talking about at the end. And the lead into that political suggestion was a page or two around the social dimensions of health and mental health, and the finding that 10% of our health is attributable to health care. 10%. And as a British doctor said, Americans have this tendency to confuse health care with health. And that, in fact, it's the way that we lead our lives, it's our own genetic predispositions, it's our behaviors, and even with the genetic predispositions, we know now from epigenetics that we turn on and off our so that was the lead to what are the conditions by which health is affected by the social context in which we live. And I lived through the 60s and 70s, and where my field was, and I think in a sincere but misguided way, thought that it could actually be a political solution, that it could have political solutions to the tumult of that era. And in fact, that's not a really good use of our talents. There are a lot of other people, and what changes things are teams of teams. And so where are there efforts underway around housing, around food security, around domestic violence, around neighborhood violence, that we can join, offer our support, our expertise that can make a difference? That was the lead into that. If we try to do that in our clinical offices, I think we're not doing our job, but this is really meant to be outside of that, and after the election on Tuesday, I forswore that I was going to do more of that. And I contacted some people on Wednesday towards that end. So, but I want to just also respond to one of the comments Victoria made, where she described sitting on the bed of one of her patients, and she said that she'd stopped doing anything at all. And au contraire, madame, I don't buy that for a second. That in fact you were really doing the right thing. It just it had become, I gather, effortless. And that's a good thing, because that means you're not burdened. But you were absolutely doing something and doing the right thing, and you could see the effect of that. And so that, and I imagine also from the Lao Tzu comment that you also had come to quiet yourself in ways that may have to do with the cognitive changes in terms of your thinking about yourself as what you do as a doctor. But also, these are eminently actionable through a whole host of practices that have to do with how we sleep, moderate, not drink too much, not, don't use drugs, don't smoke, exercise, probably the best beneficial thing that we can do for our bodies, meditation, slow breathing, coherent breathing, yogic breathing. These are all the ways that by which we can actually quiet ourselves inside, and they don't require prior approval, and they don't cost any money. So that's just a few odds and ends. Do you want to add to that, Victoria?
Well, I'm going to go back to the political part, actually, because I think it's really a great question, and I'm thinking a lot about it. And I've never really been what I consider political, although Writing God's Hotel is political in the sense it's started something, and I was hoping it would do that. But in particular, this is a remarkable moment we're at. I mean, it's just, I don't even know what to think about it. So I'm just going to tell you how I'm thinking about it, because because we're in different places. So somebody told me not to rush into burning building. That was kind of interesting. I thought that was good advice. So this last week I've just been kind of musing and watching, and all my friends and I have never talked so much politics. I've talked more politics in the last week than in my entire life put together. It's been just fascinating. I mean, people at the store, guy riding his bike, so what do you think of that? Oh my God. So there's this very interesting thing happen. At the same time, we're all watching stuff develop, because the thing that's unnerving but kind of interesting is we don't actually know we don't know what this guy's really about. We don't know where it's going. So my own, and I tend to be a kind of standoff person a little bit, so I like to watch, just like with a patient. Before we rush in and start pouring oil on the wound, why not let's see what's happening? So that's kind of my model right now. At the same time, I'm acknowledging to myself that for the first time in my life, I am got this kind of energy that wants to make sure that I do something. So I'm watching, and I'm talking to people, and I'm just kind of letting things arise. This back to sitting on the bed or something, I don't really, I mean, maybe it's effort, I don't know. I think part of this idea is I gave up was that I could actually do anything. It's like the patients I had that got cured or healed, I don't think I did anything. I mean, they had space around them, that was something, right? But it was like strange to just go like, maybe there's nothing I can, I think as Americans in specific, we have a idea that we can build a country, we can have utopia, we can make it happen. And I think if it does happen, it's going to happen on its own by us removing what's in the way of it happening. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think if I were practicing right now, which I haven't been because the book's been so much, and I were at Laguna Honda, I would specifically find my psychotic patients, and I'd ask them. I'm not kidding, because they're kind of zoomed in. Some of my patients, like Rayleigh that I was telling you about, she's zoomed into some of their, I would actually ask them what they think's going to happen and what they would do. Because I found them very stimulating to my own stuff. I really did. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. I think that, thank you for saying that, because it also, you've answered one of the challenges that Victoria put forward, which is, what in the world do you think you could do 1 hour a week when somebody has lived a lifetime this way? And the answer is, what's the multiplier effect that can be achieved in that 1 hour? And the answer is not me. It's not by seeing me every day. It's about taking the position that you described there, which is who are the people in your life, and understanding, in the case of the example that you gave of some person who was in retreat from a life, retreat from other people. It's understanding that that's what they're up about, and probably the most popular technique that has developed in the past 20, 30 years, starting in the addictions, Bill Miller, is motivational interviewing, which it starts off from the stance, I think, of that behavior is serving somebody, serving a purpose. Whatever that behavior is, and start out in the addictions. And in some of the approach is, well, you know, you haven't spoken with your family for 3 years. You know, tell me, who's in the family? How old are they? What are their names? Where do they live? What happened? And then over time, that you build that connection, at least cerebrally, and then you're in a position, using that technique, to say, you know, how's that working for you? How's that working for you? What does it give you? And what price do you pay? And then the tipping point starts to happen. So these are, it is not about, it is using the 1 hour for multiplier effect and to get close to somebody and their motivation and how you can tilt that motivation in a different direction. Well, can I just make one last comment, because in response to Victoria, because she brought up the whole issue of institutionalization and the attachment to institutionalizations. And when I started this job, I had 4,800 patients in intermediate and long-term state mental hospitals in 24 hospitals. And today I have about 3,800 in 22 hospitals. And about 1,000 of them have been there a very long time, like more than 5 years, more than 10 years. And they are institutionalized. And that it's my view that it's our responsibility to try to find alternate means of giving them community, not necessarily living alone, but for some people it might be. What's possible in the community, and my good friend Dr. Al Gauze worked on this through the VA here. What's possible in the community for them, and even if it wasn't a good idea clinically, the United States Department of Justice is now roving around. I don't know if they're here in California, but they certainly are in New York. And there was a federal ruling some time ago called the Olmsted case. Not Frederick Olmsted, the landscape architect, but a case whereby the ruling was for people to live in the least restrictive environments. And the DOJ is out patrolling for hospitals, nursing homes, adult homes. That's me. And who are people that are there unnecessarily, that living in a more restricted environment? So from both the force of the legal force and also I think the clinical belief, we want to not have people be institutionalized. We want people to have good environments to live in. Thank you very much.